you looked up to your dad growing up, and your dad was a tool maker running this manufacturing firm. What about the process of building tools excited you the most?
Well, I think just the utility of them. Uh, Something about seeing the way that my dad would go from like nothing, like literally like there would be like nothing physical, and then he would have a problem to solve, and he'd build something to solve that problem repeatedly. Like this, the thing that he would build is like literally physical metal that he would cut out to make something, and he'd be able to use that over and over and over again. And in terms of parallels to what I do now, and really like what we both do, right, as engineers, on the software side, we create tools. Like every little function that we write, every piece of code is part of something that hopefully gets used multiple times. Like if your code only runs once, probably didn't need to write code for it. But if it's running in an application where thousands of people are using it, it's going to get run again and again. And I think I got to see my dad do that in the physical world, where he would create stuff that allowed the kind of like human process to be automated in a sense, so that it could be ran multiple times. And everything we do in terms of engineering as well, it's like you have the kind of like ideate, build, test, deploy, and then continue testing. They do in manufacturing as well, and creating these kind of autonomous systems. And so there's just so many parallels to what he did that, looking back now, every time I go to his shop, we just talk about a new similarity that we found. Like it's just more and more similarities keep popping up the more that I get into what I love and that he continues to do what he loves.
Do you think that there are problems that technology can't solve?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the human side of things. It's like at the end of the day, if we can't get along as a species, then the tools that we build probably don't have much value, or they're more destructive. But if we do get along as a species and we want to keep moving things forward, the tools we'll build to move things forward are probably really beneficial and really helpful to humanity. And so at a certain point, it's kind of like the things you can't solve as a tool maker are really like, what do you want to build and why? It's almost like the need. So you can't manufacture a need. If the need is to build something bad, then you're going to have to build something bad, like something for conflict. But if the need is actually to help humanity move forward, you're going to build something incredible. So I don't think that you can really manufacture a need in terms of like building a tool to create something good. I think that that's kind of the human side of like, all right, what are we doing as a society that creates these needs for tools to be made to move us forward in whatever direction we're trying to go in.
Do you think the needs that we have as humanity keep on evolving, or do you think we're seeing recurring patterns of needs?
Yeah, I mean, history is always repeating itself. I think that we're always just kind of taking an innovation and seeing what can be done with it next. I think in general, my view is humanity is trying to move towards good. I think it's a very sad worldview to look at it as humanity is moving towards bad. Um, so generally, I try and stick with, all right, things are moving in a positive direction. Um, but yeah, I mean, literally, there's just so much that's repetition. You have stuff that was physically created in the world that is now moving to digital. I mean, as odd as it may sound, it's like Palantir, one of their like major products is this thing called a digital twin, which is basically taking physical infrastructure and mapping it to software. And it's like we're recreating the same thing just in a digital landscape that gives us more capability to kind of test what happens when certain variables are changed or certain conditions that you can't really test in the physical world happen. But yeah, I think a lot of stuff is repetitive throughout history.
Do you think in order for us to move towards a positive direction, entrepreneurship is a critical function of society?
Yeah, 100%. Uh, as much as I think that humanity is moving towards good and good, like humanity is good, I also think that people are very self-motivated and self-interested. And entrepreneurship is a wonderful way to both benefit yourself and the people around you. At the core of it, I think business is all about providing value to another person in exchange for economic value. So you solve my problem, I give you money, and the entrepreneur is happy because they get money in exchange for solving a problem. And so this is kind of where tool making comes in. If you can create a tool that repeatedly solves someone's problem, that's inherently more valuable than you having to be the one to constantly solve that problem for new or the same people. So that's really valuable. But entrepreneurship is kind of this beautiful thing that I think ties together a couple of core things about humanity, which one is this need to kind of progress and move forward. And also this good. Like, I think inherently, if we can help people move forward and good, like that's more valuable to them than being destructive or bad. And two, it involves the kind of self-interested side. Like a collection or a company is really just a collection of people that sure do come together because they want to create a shared future, but also are self-interested. You know, you're able to work with people that are joining your mission or joining your cause, but they're not doing that necessarily out of the goodness of their heart. It's because they, one, believe in what you're trying to do, but two, are signing up and getting paid in return for that. And entrepreneurship, I think, tied in with capitalism is kind of this ability or vehicle to move us towards a good direction by tying all of these really complex human emotions together and giving everyone a good outcome.
This actually reminds me of the conversation that we had before this call, where you talked a little bit about how you got your start in your career as an iOS developer at pray.com.
Yeah.
Pray.com is a Christian devotional app. And you mentioned a little bit about meeting the founder of Pray and learning through the process of working with them that even though you yourself has a Jewish background, you learned how to stand behind the mission collaboratively with your coworkers and find out that just because you're not from the same faith doesn't preclude you from sharing the same value. You and I met because my company Babbel acquired Toucan, and you co-founded Toucan and you worked as a CTO of Toucan. How were you able to rally the people behind the product that you built so wonderfully, by the way?
Thanks, Jin Young. Yeah, honestly, I learned all of that from Pray. I think my mentor there, the CEO and also the CTO, and really just the whole company, like they're just incredible people who came together in part because they wanted to experience like economic success, but also in part because they had the shared vision of a future that's good. And when they came together to do that, for both of those reasons, it really created this kind of mission for everyone that worked at that company and everyone that wanted to join that company as well. And so you mentioned, like, I come from a Jewish background. I'm not Christian. The app is very Christian. It's focused basically on Christian content. And as an employee of the company, I wasn't necessarily a user of the app. But what I did learn is all of the beautiful things that the C-suite and the founders did to motivate the whole company. And I think one of the things that they did incredibly well was share the success of the product back to the company. And like very distinctly, I remember building, like, in this app, we have the kind of content section, but we also had a social media section where people of the same faith can kind of talk and pray with each other. And when we were building that, a few months after launching, we started getting kind of testimonials from people. And so people would write in just sharing what they thought of the app and how it had impacted them. And the testimonials were amazing. Some people were saying that they had kind of lost meaning in their life and then had downloaded the app, found the content, and found the community, and kind of like that helped them on their path to finding meaning again. But there were very kind of distinct stories of like right on the edge of people committing suicide or taking their life or going down a very dark path that in some very small way, Pray helped them find a different path and find a community and find people that really cared about them. One, it's incredible that the app was able to do that in some small way. But two, it's also incredible that those stories made it back to the company and then from the company to the employees. That was always the most motivating part of it, is clearly this is doing some good. Just because it's not what I believe doesn't mean it's not helping other people who believe something different. And I think once I realized that, I was incredibly motivated to work at that company for it. And also just realizing like all of the people there are really nice people and really, really incredibly smart. But yeah, a lot of the kind of motivational pieces I took from that experience of how could we really share how this is impacting people back to our employees to help kind of motivate them on that side. And on top of it, like at the end of the day as well, it is a business. So you also have to pay people fairly. You have to make sure that they're compensated well. You have to make sure that there's a path for them to grow and get better at what they do. And so all of that honestly kind of comes from my experience at Prey, where I was kind of mentored on one, how do you create something of value? Then how do you bring it to market? And then how do you get amazing people to work on it and keep working on it? That's kind of the lessons I applied at Toucan.
And when you say creating value, one of the things that you mentioned was how you saw that there was a lot of good being done by the work that you were doing at Prey. But in a world of business where a lot of the things that we measure tend to be very metrics driven, quantitative data, how do you go about sort of materializing the success of the project that doesn't seem all that quantitative, or there is something that can't really be explained by numbers?
Yeah, that's also a beautiful part about Prey is their audience is very faithful. Like they have a very faithful audience that there's something greater than themselves out there in the world. And to a certain extent, the company is as well, right? Like when you truly believe that it's going to work out for you, it's going to work out for you. And I think that that's an approach that really great companies take as well, is if they truly provide enough value for people, they're going to work with so many people that are open to that exchange of value, that their audience becomes so large that in the future, in the exchange of value, there's going to be monetary success as well. And I think for Prey, that really ended up working out. Like when I was there, we didn't necessarily have a very clear vision of, all right, how is it going to make as much money? Like there were a bunch of ideas, like a ton of ideas, all that aligned with users. But at the end of the day, we kind of ventured into, and this was after I left the company, but they really figured it out. And also they had faith like that. I can't go back to that enough. Like that's incredible. But they had the faith to keep going, knowing that they're giving away a ton of value for free. And what later on they ended up doing is now they have a premium subscription, which allows people to subscribe to more premium content. And that's doing incredibly well monetarily for them as well. So in a certain sense, what I learned from them as well is if you put enough faith into this exchange of value and doing really good and making sure that you're giving away as much value as possible, there is a way to kind of find economic success from that later on.
When you work on a company that has a growing user base, do you find that it's easier or harder to, I guess, infer the needs of the users because the user base is growing and there's more diversity of needs? Have you found that when you were experimenting with different ideas, maybe at Prey or maybe at Toucan, you found that it became easier to zero in on users' needs, or it became a little harder because a lot of the user needs were a lot more varied by nature?
Yeah, I think it gets harder, but I also think that Prey had an extreme benefit, which is the founders of the company are their audience. And so they know what they need at the end of the day. And it's beautiful to see yourself create something that will benefit you, because you also know if you create something that's going to benefit you, it's going to benefit a lot more people as well. I think with Toucan, I had struggled to learn languages in high school. And I took like 4 years of Mandarin, and with an amazing Mandarin teacher, like she was incredible. But I may not have been the best student, and also didn't practice it. So in the very early days of Toucan, it was kind of easy to see, all right, I'm helping essentially myself and my co-founders as well. They were in a similar situation. They took a lot of Spanish classes or Portuguese classes and learned it, but didn't really keep up with it. So I'd say in the early days of Toucan, we were building very much for ourselves. But what we realized is, hey, we wanted to build something that provides more value to people who really, really want to learn a language. And that's where we had to go a little bit beyond our own experience, because we had tried to learn a language in high school and college in my co-founders' cases. But a lot of our audience for Toucan later on turned out to be people that were really interested in learning a language that maybe had or hadn't already learned it in high school, but kind of in a different way. They may not have struggled with it as much as we did.
Shaun, I think one thing that I always remark on when you talk about Toucan and reading some articles on TechCrunch and just learning about how you guys talked about Toucan's positioning in the overall market and the industry, it seems like Toucan's leadership has always been focused on partnerships. And even though Babbel acquired Toucan, I don't think I've ever seen you mention Babbel as a competitor, but rather Babbel would be a nice complement as a language learning tool. I'm curious what your views are on the idea of a zero-sum game and whether entrepreneurship is something that you would consider a zero-sum game or a positive-sum game.
Yeah, definitely positive sum game. I just think there's genuinely so much opportunity out there to go after, and also opportunity creates more opportunity. So I think all of that really was from our CEO, who's incredible, and she really had the view that if we can partner with more people, we're actually just expanding our reach and expanding their offering. And so it's really a win-win on both sides of that. Babbel, if we had partnered before the acquisition, probably would have had no desire to create something like Toucan. And Toucan really would have no desire to create something like Babbel. But when you offer them together, now all of a sudden you actually are able to work with two different audiences. On the Toucan side, this lower intent audience that is more interested in getting something to help them learn passively in the background. And then on the Babbel side, this kind of more high intent audience, meaning they want to spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day in an app. And when you combine them, either through partnership or acquisition, you end up being able to serve both of these audiences and move them from one to the other, depending on their wants and needs. I think that ends up just creating more opportunity. It's not necessarily a zero-sum game.
I'd like us to sort of go back to something we talked about outside of this call, which was you jumping into this career in your senior year of high school. This was also something that you did in lieu of going to college or university. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about your thought process when you were making that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Was getting a lot of advice from my dad is number one. I think at the end of coming up to the end of high school, was really not sold on the idea of college. Genuinely, I'm honestly, as much as I am very optimistic about the future, I am also skeptical of when a lot of people want to do something. It kind of makes me skeptical of what is that thing and who is telling you to do that. But I was very fortunate to have a dad that was kind of talking with me about that. And really my entire family was very supportive of that. But two, I had two teachers in high school, who one of them was an English teacher. And in I believe it's the third year of high school, had this project. It was called the College Project. And as basically one of the major standpoints of your grade, you had to submit your college essays to the college that you wanted to go to and put together your whole application. And she would grade you on that. So she would help you write a better essay. She'd give you a grade on that. If you got a B, it was basically representative of, hey, I don't think this is good enough. You got to go and make it better and I'll help you make it better. And all my friends were doing the college project. And I think I just had a conversation with her one day. And I was like, hey, I'm honestly not sold on this college thing. But I understand that this is a big part of my grade. But I don't think I'm going to use this. I think even if I get into a college, I don't know if I'm going to go. And she created a different project for me. She was like, well, what do you want to do? And at the time, I remember looking at the Teal Fellowship was something I was interested in. And so she basically graded me on preparing all the materials for a Teal Fellowship application, which I ended up not doing because I had met Steve from Prey, who started Prey, and went down that path instead. But one, just kind of the acceptance from someone in the system like in the school system, kind of letting me know, hey, even though this is the system, like you don't have to go this route, was really helpful. And then two, the kind of counsel from my family was really beneficial as well. I remember asking my dad what he thought, and he was just like, you're going to get paid to learn what they can't teach you in college. And it's just so true. It was so good. And then I also remember calling him when I was going to start Toucan, and I was leaving a good paying job and benefits and all the sweet stuff that comes with being an employee. And I was like, is it worth the risk? And he was just like, absolutely. Like, when else are you ever going to have the ability to take on more risk than today? And I think that that's very true. Like, continue. The older you get, the less risk you can take on. And so, yeah, just very grateful for the counsel of my family and then also that teacher.
Did you ever view not going to college as an irreversible decision? Or did you ever think about maybe spending some time in the workforce and eventually going back to college with a clearer intention of what it is that you wanted to specialize in?
Yeah, totally. Like, literally, I talk about it quite often that at some point in my life, I think I'm going to go study philosophy. Um, and it's just a subject I'm really passionate about. It's like when I read at night, like I love reading philosophy books. And yeah, I honestly don't think I would go to college for like career advice or to help me advance in my career. But I do think I would go to college to kind of help me advance in these things that I want to learn outside of my career. Um, and yeah, I don't think it's a one-way door. I think just because I didn't go doesn't mean I can't go. Um, and I also think just because you went doesn't mean you can't excel in stuff outside of college. Like, I think it's very much not a one-way door either way.
Do you think there's ever been something or a decision that you made in your life that has been a one-way door?
Mm, no. Yeah, genuinely no. It's like so much of life is reversible. And I think it's like if you truly genuinely try your hardest at each step of the way, like people admire you and appreciate you and want to work with you again. Yeah, nothing really is kind of irreversible, I feel like. Sure, there is stuff that's like extreme, but not all the time.
I'm really glad you brought up philosophy because there's a question that I've kind of been holding on to, but I wasn't sure if it would be considered a little too deep. But I think as aficionados of philosophy, I do want to remark on what you said about Prey providing that social value to the users and how you saw very firsthand that a lot of the users who lost meaning in their lives were able to get it back. And I'm curious if you've ever thought about what the meaning of life is.
Oh man. Uh I mean, I think it's different to everyone probably. And I think in some sense religion provides that meaning of life for a lot of people. Um and in that sense it's a very good thing. Like religion is truly a very good thing in that sense. I don't know. I think for me the meaning of life is really just to spend time with the people I love and create stuff that's really fun for me. If I'm having a good day, it generally looks like I'm building something and getting excited about it. And if I just get to do that and then come home and spend time with people I love, that's a pretty cool day. Yeah. What do you think?
I think it ties quite well with what you said about work and providing value to the world. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot more recently, at least the way that I view the progression of my career and progression of my life. I found that through time and through experience in different circumstances, I've learned how to apply myself. And I think each time I learn a little bit more about how I fit into the world. And I also think that in that sense, work is a crucial vehicle in learning how you can also add value to the world. And I'm at a point where I've been playing with this idea of what would an aspirational pursuit look like? What would a vocation look like? And that's been a really interesting sort of inner monologue in my head. What do you think? I mean, what's the meaning of work for you?
Oh, it's about creativity. Yeah, it's almost like this like childlike thing, which is if you're so in the zone about something and so creative with something, and time really flies, it just feels really good. Like selfishly, it just feels really good. But also, if you're in that state, you're probably creating something that's really good for other people too. So you get to share in that. And then the economic side of that, if it does perform well, you get to bring it to more people. You get to have the capital to allow you to scale it and bring it to more people. So that becomes kind of bigger. There's this like, I don't know exactly when I came up with this framing, and it's evolved a lot, but this kind of guiding force of my work has been, all right, I want to create stuff that does good, and I want to do that in kind of a capitalistic way, because I think that when you create something and it provides value and it makes money, you can use that money to create more of it, to do more good, which gets more money. And it's like this like literal flywheel of, sure, it's very like entrepreneurial, but if you do good work, you end up getting to just do it more for more people through that system. And so I guess that's kind of the meaning of work to me, is like, how can you create the system that's like very flywheel like to just bring more value to more people?
When would it be enough? When the amount of value that you provide to the world, when do you think is the right time to say, I've provided a lot of value, I've extracted what I wanted out of my career, and perhaps it's time to look into other domains of my life? Or is there such a thing? Is it an infinite game?
I think it's an infinite game. It's probably when you run out of juice, when you're like, I don't have anything to create anymore, uh, or I don't have anything that calls my name to create. It's like, yeah, the only reason, you start a company is because you don't have any other option. Like truly, it's, yeah. I think I remember calling my dad and telling him like, hey, should I start this? And I told you it was the kind of risk conversation, but also in the back of my mind, it was like, I'm just calling because I'm a son and I want to talk to my dad about this. But I already know like there's parts of me that just don't do well working for others. And there's also is like something that I want to see created in the world. And I'm uniquely positioned to be able to go and create it. So yeah, in essence, I think is kind of like always create stuff as long as you have the want to create stuff.
That unique positioning, I'm really curious about. I wonder if you've ever considered whether you have a unique gift that perhaps is something that you were born with, or if you believe at all that everyone has a unique gift to provide to the world.
Yeah, everyone has it in different ways. I mean, I think that's honestly, I think AI is going to be like the biggest driver of this, which is if AI truly ends up just helping people do all of the boring, monotonous work, the only work that people will be required to do is the creative stuff that's fun for them. And I say creative, but I mean that in like literally every field will have something creative. It's like, I'm trying to think of the most boring thing to me is like Excel spreadsheets with numbers, like, and finances and accounting and stuff. I would want that automated. I would want that to not be done by me. But there are absolutely people in the world that look at that, and to them, that's the most creative and fun thing. And they're going to do so much better at that than an AI robot will do, like, just because they bring creativity to it. And I think that in the future, it's going to really be about how do we help people find the things that they feel really good about creating, rather than how do you go join this career that's going to get the most value for you. It's really, I don't know, I think it's going to end up being a forcing function to just allow people to find what they're good at.
When you talk about creativity, you almost equate it to having fun and
Yeah.
feeling good. And it reminded me of a concept called flow state by Csikszentmihalyi. And I'm curious if, besides engineering and entrepreneurship, if you've been able to reap the benefits of flow state in other aspects of your life.
Yeah, totally. But mostly like physical stuff. Like I'd say like sports. So snowboarding, mountain biking, like honestly just the exhilaration of going down a hill really fast is like for some reason very flow state to me, or it creates this flow state. Yeah, where I'm using my body in a way that's kind of like showing myself what I'm capable of. I don't know. That's a really fun thing that creates this flow state and this kind of like inspiration and fun.
Do you think it's possible to, I guess, develop or cultivate the sensation of flow state in areas that you previously didn't have the sensation in, maybe through mastery, for instance, with snowboarding, if that's something that you've always felt this flow state?
Yeah, I've always felt flow state in that, to be honest. But yeah, I don't know. I think there is totally an opportunity to create flow state in something that you're not good at. I'll say that. It's like when I started programming, for example, I was not good at it, but I enjoyed it. And so maybe there's kind of this like important caveat to flow state and creativity, which is like just because you're not good at it at first doesn't mean you should give it up. You should look more at the kind of passion side of it. Like, do you feel passionate enough to put up with being bad at it for a long time? And then you'll get the flow state on the other side. And honestly, even in being bad, there's lots of moments of, wow, that was amazing. Like being able to go from like step 1 to step 2 on a 5,000 step journey. If you get excited by going from step 1 to step 2, it's probably a sign that you're like doing the right thing. Versus if you get from step 1 to step 2 and you're like, oh my God, there's so many more steps, you're probably not doing the right thing. Like, yeah, but you should still put in the work if you're like excited by that small increment.
So essentially, you know when or when not to give up based on this energy that you derive from whatever it is that you're doing, despite the external outcome of it.
Yeah. It's almost like every step is kind of like either a win or a failure, like you made it or you didn't. And I guess like how good do you feel by the wins, even at their smallest stage? Like even at the smallest thing. Like I was a big rock climber as well, and I loved rock climbing. And just being able to move from like a V1, which is like the easiest bouldering type thing, to a V2, like very small step, but oh my gosh, did it feel so good. And even like if you're working on a route of just like climbing up this wall, the moment you're able to get one move out of the 100 moves that you have to do that you've been working towards, it's just like you don't focus so much on the fact that you fell. You just focus on the fact that, oh, I made it one step further than I did before. And that's really cool.
Now I'm curious a little bit more about something that I think you and I have that are common to both of our lives, which is that both of us went through a non-traditional path of learning programming and getting into this field. And you mentioned this concept of progression and this concept of cultivating the sense of momentum. When did it sort of start to click for you? You mentioned that you weren't quite good at programming before. Do you think it's something that everyone struggles? And do you think there are people who might be more uniquely gifted in programming? Or do you believe the myth of a genius programmer?
Yeah, I still think I'm terrible at programming. Like, genuinely, I'm not a good programmer, but I am very good at building what's in my head. And I feel bad for whoever has to work on that after, which is unfortunate. But I say that just because it's like, at the end of the day, it's what I'm passionate about. Like, I love going from this kind of like 0 to 1 on a new idea. And just because I don't think that it's a very good result, like on the technical side of it, doesn't mean that there aren't people out there who enjoy taking something like that and turning it into a really good piece of code. And there's people that are very good at that and feel the same enthusiasm that I feel about bringing something from 0 to 1. So I will say I don't think the genius programmer is a thing, but I do think that there are people that are very good at different parts of programming. And when they all work together and hand off to the right skill set, I think it's a really beautiful thing.
When you talk about good code, do you think there's a certain objectivity to that? Or do you find that good code is one where people can collaborate together and come to this final outcome?
Yeah. I think taking a step back, even like good code should first be evaluated as like, is it a good need? Like, do you even have a need to write code in the first place? Which, as engineers, I think we fall into answering yes by default to that, like nearly 100% of the time. And that's just not good. Like, how I've automated so much stuff that had no need to be automated because there was no need for it to exist. And so I think the best code is actually no code. And then outside of that, I think when you do write code, it's very subjective to figure out what is good or not good. But to your point, there's probably some amount of the more someone is able to work with other people in that code, the better the code probably is, which honestly just means the simpler the code is, the better it is. And really, the simpler the system, the better the system is. It's almost like creating something simple is like the hardest thing ever.
Right, because simple can also be subjective based on the proficiency of the programmer, but also based on what the programmer is used to seeing, right?
Yeah, but that is also something you can totally measure. Like, as an example, how quickly can you hire a new engineer and can they commit code to production? And you can measure that. You can say, all right, on average, it takes us 6 days from hire to code in production. Well, if it's 6 days, that's actually pretty bad. Like, it means that there's a lot of steps and systems and like things that are getting in the way of this person who is capable because you hired them because they're a capable person. There's a lot of steps between them joining and getting code in production. And a lot of that is probably them learning your processes and learning your code base. Whereas if you had a simple code base and simple processes, really that should be measured in days, in like 1 day or even hours. Like on hour 3 of being at the company, can they deploy to production? And literally companies as big as Facebook measure in that regard. Like if a company as big as Facebook can measure how long it takes for someone to go from hire to deployed in production, like that's phenomenal. That's super cool.
This actually reminds me a little bit about what I read on TechCrunch, the way that the three of you, the co-founders of Toucan, got started in developing the prototype. And something that really caught my attention was just how the three of you as a unit seemed very much action-driven. And a lot of it was less about ideation and mulling over different nitty-gritty details about what Toucan would look like, but deploying this as soon as possible and gathering user feedback.
Yeah.
How do you go about reconciling the uncertainty that you have on whether the users will find value in whatever it is that you build as an MVP?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of faith, which is funny that it ties back to pray, but honestly, it's kind of like, do you just have the faith that this idea is good enough and that the execution is going to be good enough as well, that people will find this valuable? I mean, I can also tell you, like, the first version of Toucan was something I already found valuable. Like, literally being able to see the result of it within, a day or hours of kind of starting the project and seeing like the words get translated on the screen. It was just, that's so cool. Like it's beautiful. And it was really like, oh my gosh, I totally could have used that in high school. And I'm going to use it now. Like already there was kind of value, but yeah, at the end of the day, you got to put in so much work before it gets to a large audience. And there's so much faith involved in that of like, is your hard work going to pay off? You got to put faith into it.
When you do get to a certain user base or certain clientele of users who find value in your product, how much should one follow their intuition, their initial intuition that perhaps comes intrinsically versus the feedback that they get extrinsically?
Yeah, it's a really hard question. I don't think there's any answer to that really. It's just kind of like you have to listen to users to understand if they're enjoying your product, but you also have to have a clear direction as the people creating the business and creating the product. So I would say it's like you can't do it without either of them. You do need a certain amount of both.
This might be another juicy question, but
Yeah.
I'm curious when you guys went through this acquisition phase and now you're at the other end of the tunnel.
Hmm.
How has your identity changed post acquisition?
Ooh. Um, Not too much, to be honest. I think if anything, Toucan was like very much like a learning experience for me of what to do, what not to do. But I wouldn't say my identity changed, but I did learn a lot from it. And I guess it kind of was also very fun to create. Like I feel very fulfilled from that sense. And not having that thing to create anymore was challenging, but it just gets me excited to create something else again. I don't know if that exactly makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. Yeah. When you talk about learning, it seems to be a recurring pattern for you where you're chasing different opportunities to exercise your creativity, or I guess creativity, but in large part curiosity. How do you really measure the progress of learning? Does it have to be based on a certain context? So you and I both know, working for a language learning company, a lot of ways that we measure learner progress is to see how competent they would be if they were to travel to um, Istanbul when they were learning Turkish, and the ease of communication, perceived fluency. Do you think learning has to be context based, or do you think there is a more generalizable way to measure the outcome of learning?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to measure the outcome of learning is application. So, can you actually apply what you learned? That to me is always going to be like the best measure of learning. It's why why I didn't agree with taking tests and quizzes in high school. But yeah, just are you able to actually apply what you learned, and how quickly can you apply what you learned? And so for language learning, one of the big things that prevents people from applying what they learned is actually not that they don't know it. It's psychologically hard for them to get over the fear of failure because it's actually embarrassing to say something in a different language that was wrong or not what you wanted to say or rude or whatever it is. It's embarrassing to make a mistake, especially in front of another person and to another person. So a large part of language learning is actually about removing the psychological thing that prevents us from making mistakes in front of other humans, which I think is a really powerful concept. Because if you can do an effective job teaching someone to learn a language, but they can't get over the fear in their head to go and try it in front of someone, I don't think they've learned the language. And as odd as that is, they could have a full mastery of it, but if they don't apply it, it's basically the same as not having it.
It sounds a lot like the discussion around growth mindset or closed mindset.
Hmm.
Would you say that learning in general requires a certain mental model, being the immunity or perhaps a certain buffer from the fear of failure, or to not let ego get in the way of making progress just because you're not so good at that thing yet?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it kind of ties back to the conversation about passion because I think if you're passionate about something, truly, like if you reach a hurdle where you are so passionate about something, you will get over the fear of failure. And generally, one of the things that I think is hard about school is it pushes you to learn a lot of things and you have to take tests on them and you have to go with the process, even if you're not very passionate about it. But I will tell you, like, I hated failing on tests, which would happen often, but didn't love it, but I was okay with failing at programming just because I enjoyed it. And so I think that there's kind of this like, even for language learning, is it one, yes, I think programs and courses should help people get over that fear of failure. But two, like, is the person actually ready for that? Like, are they actually truly passionate enough to jump into language learning? to embarrass themselves in front of someone else when they say something wrong, you can't get someone ready for that. Truly, like, you can help them if they're already wanting to, but if they don't want to do that, then really there's not much you can do. So it's kind of like there's this great quote of like trying to sell a pen to someone, and I think it's the Wolf of Wall Street guy, like, goes on CNBC or something, and he's asked, sell this pen, and the first thing he says was, well, do you want this pen? Are you in the market for a pen? And the person's like, no. And then it's just like, well, then I'm never going to be able to sell you a pen. If you don't want this pen, there's no reason in me trying to sell it to you. And I think that that's true about learning too, is like, what do you actually want to learn?
How do you know that, though? How do you know what it is that you want to learn? This discussion that we've had about trade school, your dad having gone through this apprenticeship program, and it's quite topical these days in America to talk about how trades have become a robust mechanism for economic security. But wouldn't you also be able to argue that liberal arts education does have a place in society where people might not be so sure of what they do want to learn at age 18 when they graduate from high school? So in some sense, trade schools might be a little too predeterministic.
Yeah, 100%. But then I think it comes down to the question of what's the fair exchange of value for being able to explore a bunch of different ideas. So if you don't know what you want to do and you go to college to figure that out, right now in America, I don't know what the cost is, but I think it's expensive. Like, if we can just say on average, like 20 grand a year or something for a lower end school, which is also fine, but just 20 grand a year, is that a fair trade to make to get to explore what you want to do? Or are there other alternatives to figure out what you want to do? And yes, I think there should be a place for people to figure out what they want to do. But in my mind, $20,000 or whatever that value is, especially if it's more than that, is not a fair trade to do that.
Do you think there's also something quite mimetic at play where you might see peers in high school going through the default path of going to university, and perhaps that influencing your decision in some way, just as much as your dad having gone to trade school, inspiring you to go into trades, tool making, but also in entrepreneurship too?
Totally. I mean, in the philosophy sense, like, a philosopher named Rene Girard talks about mimetic theory a lot. And in a certain sense, you can say that even I was influenced mimetically by not going to school, because so many people go to school that my desire to not go to school may have actually been coming from a place of wanting to rebel a little bit. And I think that there's truth in that for sure. But I also think that there's truth in the fact that, hey, it actually is a lot of pressure if you don't want to be a rebel and you don't want to go against the grain just because it's going against the grain. If you're in school and you have family that has gone to school and all of your classmates are going to college, you're going to feel pressure to go to college as well.
For you, Shaun, where does that desire to go against the grain come from?
I have no idea. It's honestly just like always been there and always been uh, fun. I don't know how to describe it. It's just kind of like there's a certain amount of funness that comes from it. And it's not in a like arbitrary way, essentially. Like, it's not just everything I'm going to go against what someone else says, but yeah, there again, it's kind of a certain amount of creativity kind of comes from it, and that feels fun.
Do you think maybe there might be this desire for agency that's coming into play where you want to be able to own the decisions that you make and perhaps the direction of life that you're taking on?
100%. 100%. I think so much of entrepreneurship is about agency at the end of the day. It's like probably the probably one of the biggest things anyone can do for themselves that gives them agency and control over their life is to start a business. That for me is why I started a business. It probably is also a big reason why I like going against the grain. And it is still I think the best way for people to gain a lot of confidence in themselves is to start a business. It's like a crucible. It's literally like this crucible for growth. It's unbelievable in building confidence and also just in setting up your life to be yours.
With that said, I'm curious how you would want to show up to the world. Would you want to show up to the world as an entrepreneur, a problem solver, someone who meets other people's needs? What do you rank higher in terms of value, the agency or the ability to, I guess, provide value?
Yeah, I think genuinely, I just want to have fun and be creative. So I think if I'm showing up to the world in kind of a creative way, to me, that's the value I think I can provide to society. And on my end of that, sure, I want to be rewarded financially for that, as I think everyone should be if they're being creative and providing value. But to me, selfishly, like I just have fun when I'm doing that. And so that's kind of how I want to show up to the world. Because I also have noticed when I'm having fun, other people seem to be having fun. And that seems to be kind of reciprocal. And so I think it's genuinely not just good for me, but good for others if we're kind of all in this creative space.
Sean, this reminds me of a pretty personal conversation that we had, which was a few months ago when I was going through a bout of depression.
Mm,
The advice that you gave me was to put myself first. I really like what you said because you can't really pour from an empty cup. You need to be
yeah.
able to help yourself so you can help other people. And ultimately, I think a lot of what we do comes from the origin of self-love. I think in order for us to show up to the world in the way that we want, in the way that's meaningful, we also need to show up for ourselves first and foremost. So I really appreciate you saying that to me back then. It really, really helped a lot.
Oh, I'm glad it did. I'm glad it did.
Yeah. I know we're coming to time, so I just wanted to say it's really been a huge honor to have you on board. I think you've got a brilliant mind, and I really do admire you as someone who I've been so serendipitous to have met. So a lot of what you share today hopefully will inspire other people to make the decisions that you made or not. But overall, I think you provide a lot of value as a person, regardless of whatever business that you create, because you've certainly inspired me. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you create next and how you increase the surface area of fun in your life.
Well, thank you, Jin Young. I feel like I can say a lot of the same things about you as well. And it's just fun hanging out with you and talking. And you're a very creative and empathetic person as well. And I really appreciate you.